So let's talk about the progenitor class. And to do that, I need an example. So here we have William Legge, the first Earl of Dartmouth, and there you see his lifespan. And I'm going to use his children as an example of what progenitor, or what I mean when I say progenitor. Because in the term progenitor, pro being first, genitor being of the generation, this would be the 5 boys who were born to William Legge. The firstborn is George. Then there's the others. Harry, Thomas, Henry, and Edward. But under progenitor inheritance laws, everything, including the title Earl of Dartmouth, goes to the firstborn, George. Harry, Thomas, Henry, and Edward, they do not receive any money, any inheritance, anything. They don't receive the title Earl, unless George dies, but not even then. If George died but didn't have a son, then the Earl of Dartmouth title would go to the secondborn, which would be Harry. It just so happened George did die before his father. So Harry was looking good, until they discovered that George had a boy named William. So the first Earl of Dartmouth is William, and the second Earl of Dartmouth, when William died, is William, the grandson of William. Confusing? Not really. What's interesting, though, is between these 5 kids, historians know that the brightest and the best was Henry, but he was the 4th born. Henry has no hope of earning the title Earl of Dartmouth under progenitor rules. The only thing Henry is armed with is his education. Because Dad was exceedingly wealthy, he could send all 5 boys to very expensive schools. Well, they all learned ancient Greek, ancient Latin, and then went on to learn other things like science and history and new technologies coming out of the 17th and 18th centuries. Thomas and Edward would also seek their own fortunes, and this is the point I'm trying to make. George gets everything because he's the first. Harry, Thomas, Henry, and Edward, they're the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th sons. They have to make their own way. They have no choice. They're not getting anything from the estate. Maybe, if George was a nice guy, the firstborn, he would set a little sum aside for his brothers. Every month or every year they would get some money from their older brother. Most older siblings did this because they didn't want their younger siblings to kill them, which is what Shakespeare's Macbeth is all about. And here's the thing. Who made William Legge Earl in the first place? Because he's the first Earl of Dartmouth, and Dartmouth has been around a very long time. So who made him the first Earl of Dartmouth? And why? Well, it turns out that it was Queen Anne in 1711 when she needed a certain vote in the House of Lords to go her way, and she didn't have enough votes. Well, William Legge was around, and he was a noted Tory, and he had committed himself to the success of the Queen, and the Queen rewarded him by giving him the area known as Dartmouth, north of London. William, Dartmouth is yours. I make you the Earl. You collect all the rents out of Dartmouth. That's the reason why. But who gets to be the second Earl? It's George. But see, I told you George died before his father did, but George had a son named William, and so William will be the second. And what about the others? Again, they have to make their own way in the world. And this is vitally important because the New World, Virginia, Massachusetts, the Eastern Seaboard, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, the Caribbean, India, all of these places that England started to expand outward to. The empire became a place where that second, third, fourth, fifth son, the progenitor class is what I call them, can now make their way. And this is vitally important to understand in the settlement of America, which is what I want to talk about. Because if you look at the James I document, the one that says the abbreviated form of the Charter of Virginia, it's filled with people from the progenitor class. They are the first ones to be given the charter. A charter is a document that allows you to make up your own laws in a certain area decreed by the king. And they receive this charter. It's people from this particular class of people, those second, third, fourth, fifth sons that want to go, to leave civilizations and head into the swamps of nowhere. And they're seeking their fame, they're seeking fortune, they're seeking their own way, and they're going to use the Headright System to get there. It's that Headright System says if you can transport yourself to the New World, pay for it, you will get 50 free acres. And if you can pay for anybody else to go, for each additional person you pay for, you will get another 50 acres. So if you can pay for the passage of, let's say, 10 people, plus yourself, you will receive, that's 11 total, times 50 acres, 550 acres of land. It's yours. And what's great about the Headright System is this 550 acres comes with 10 people who are going to help you clear it and plant it with tobacco, which you can sell, earn money from, and then buy more servants and bring them over, and thus get more land. So the Headright System was the system that the Virginia Company, through the charter of James I's document, began operations. Well, what if the person you paid for came over the country, or you paid for, they started in Bristol, England, but as they were sailing the Atlantic, before they could make it, they died? Do I get 50 acres still? What if the person I paid for couldn't speak a word of English, if they were from, let's say, the Germanic lands? As we saw before, they were in the midst of war. About a third to a half of all Germans were losing their lives in a war they didn't want. So what if I brought someone who couldn't speak English? Could I get 50 acres of land still? What if I paid for a 2-year-old to come over? It can't work. But I still get 50 acres? What if I paid for a woman to come over, and then on her way she gave birth? Do I get 50 acres for the woman? And 50 acres for the fetus that she gave birth to, now a child? A 2-for-1 kind of deal? What if the person that I paid for to come over here was a slave of African descent? Can I get 50 acres for that African? All this became part of the games of laws that were being voted on in the Virginia Assembly, the Burgess, but also back in London. And the laws kept changing and fluctuating with who was in power and who was not. But it was an interesting system, this Headright System. George Menifee is an example of someone extremely wealthy who paid for himself and paid for 60 total people to come over to Virginia in the year 1638. He basically bought his own ship and just filled it with passengers who would then become his servants. 60 servants for 5 years. And in return, he received 3,000 acres. So what I'm saying is, in the Headright System, not only are you able to get land this way, you're able to get land and labor. So it was a good system for those that had money. And it wasn't too bad for those that didn't have money, because at the end of 5 years, or maybe 7, depending on the amount of money that was spent on you to bring you over, the indentured servant would be given an outfit. So you worked for George Menefee for 5 years. At the end of your 5 years, you're free. But you're not just being tossed aside. George Menefee has to give you an outfit. No, not something you wear, something you carry. Tools, a wagon, weaponry, seeds, a mule, maybe a horse. He would outfit you to go to another 50 acres, to which you would have to pay no rent, because those 50 acres belong to George Menefee. You could live there for the rest of your life rent-free if you wanted. Called the quit rent. Quit paying rent. You're there for free. As long as you and your family stay there for the rest of your life rent-free. And so you had a lot of indentured servants that would do this. They would go out, 50 acres, life was good, they built the house, they built the barn, they had a bunch of cows, things were looking good, then the husband died. Next day, George Menefee knocks on the door. Sorry about your husband, but you owe me rent now. It was good for George Menefee, certainly. Now, you, as an indentured servant, didn't have to take the outfit and the quit rent. You could just go out into the wilderness and try and find your own money and your own property. There's a Freethorn document that shows you how difficult it was for servants to even survive their first 5 years. So, again, going back to the George Menefee example, he paid for 60 people to come over. He gets 3,000 acres. Of those initial 60, only 22 of them survived. He still gets to keep the 3,000 acres. So it's a really good system for those that are wealthy. It's a somewhat good system for an indentured servant to get over here, because one thing they get access to is land. So you can work for George Menefee on the quit rent system, and then the money that you're making off your farm, once you save up for a few years, then you can go out and buy your own land. And then Menefee would get his land back again. Start it all over. So it was a good system. Almost all the way around, somewhat. Which leads us to Virginia's first rebellion. And we're going to talk about two rebellions, but I want to talk about the first one. Now, the picture here shows Jamestown around 1630, but it's around Jamestown is what's important. And what's important is, well, tobacco. And John Harvey, who was the governor of Virginia, had a problem because of this tobacco issue, at least on the surface. So here we have beautiful pictures of tobacco ship in the background. It wasn't that idyllic, trust me. And we had these second, third, fourth sons that were looking to eke out and make it their own way, heading all the way out to Virginia to try and make life their own. They grab all this land, and they have demands. They have needs. And Harvey wasn't meeting those needs. So what these progenitor folks do is they actually seize John Harvey. The governor is under strict rules from King back in England, and the governor tries to follow what the king wants in Virginia. But what the king wants and what these progenitor class in Virginia wants are two different things. And there's this conflict, and we're going to get into it. But the governor attempts to arrest, of all people, George Menefee, who's really the moderate in all of this. And when he goes to do that, several gentlemen give the signal, and suddenly bursting into John Harvey's house are people who are toting 40 muskets, guns at the ready, and they seize him. They put the governor under arrest. The House of Burgess meets on the same day, and they do declare that one of their own, named John West, is the new governor of the state of the colony of Virginia. On May 23rd, the old governor, John Harvey, is sent back to England, escorted by his prosecutors. I need to back up a little bit. Just a tad. The first thing that we need to know before we get to this point is why these progenitors are so upset. So we go back to 1616. This is the second charter given to a company called Virginia. Virginia is a corporation. It's a company. It's meant to make money. The first charter of Virginia, which you will read, 1606, is given to certain people. It doesn't make money. It loses money. So 1616, we get a second charter for the Virginia Company, a new investors that are going to breathe life into Virginia. So that's the theory. A lot of it surrounds land, and it's this Headright system that is legally written. So where you see in yellow are right along the rivers, the best land in all of the Chesapeake. Sure, there's Indians there. There's the Nanticoke, the Piscataway, the Powhatan, all these tribes. They have to be dealt with somehow. But what's more important is that tobacco is grown along these rivers, and that the land is cleared, the tobacco is planted, and then you can use ships to go up the rivers, and then the tobacco is just loaded right there on the ships, and then the ships head to England. The thing about land is this. Land is liberty. Because a lot of these second, third, fourth, fifth sons, which I just talked about, do not inherit any land. They don't handle any estates whatsoever back in England. But if they could get land in the New World, they get the liberty to do what their oldest brother can do. See what I'm saying? If they can become freeholders, which is an old term, meaning that they freely hold this land, that it cannot be taken away arbitrarily. That's an important point here. If they can be called freeholders, then they can charge rents. So they're using the Headright system in the second charter of Virginia. It is described to a T in the second charter of Virginia. And this is how Virginia Company, the corporation, plans to make its money. All you have to do to be an investor is to come up with money for yourself and one other person, and you'll automatically get 100 acres. And the more people that you bring over, the more servants that you bring over, the downtrodden and the poor, and you pay for their passage, those downtrodden and poor equal not only labor to you, but 50 acres to a head. But then, in 1622, the Powhatan tribe rebels. Their confederation of Indians attacks Jamestown, and they attack other cities in and around that area. Well, not cities, but small enclaves of white people. Anywhere between a fourth to a third of all white settlers are killed in the 1622 uprising. The corporation did not do its job in protecting these people. And this earned the ire of the King of England at the time, Charles I. So from 1616 to 1624, Virginia is a corporation. It's a company owned by investors. Charles I, because of the Indian massacre, will revoke the Charter of Virginia. Well, it's one of the reasons why he revokes the charter. The other is that the Virginia Company still isn't making enough money. So the corporation goes away. Charles I seizes control of Virginia. Virginia becomes a state entity. It is now held by the king. He owns it. Virginia becomes state-owned. Once a company, not anymore. And here's the problem to those people that settled in 1616. Without a company, who was going to issue the land? According to the 1616 second charter of the Virginia Company, it was the company itself that was to determine who was to come over, which of the second, third, fourth, and fifth sons were going to come over, take control of land, and pay for people to come over and become servants. Who is going to issue that land now that the company ceases to exist? Second problem is the Virginia Charter revoked. Part of it was the headright to make money. You cannot pay for the passage of people to come over anymore. There's no more labor force without a company. And so people kept asking the king, Charles, sir, oh most gracious one, you've revoked the charter. We're unsure about how land is going to be issued and how we can create a labor force. And worse, we have no assurances of which way you're going to go. The king was a brand new king, Charles I, very young. And he had issues. And a lot of people in Parliament didn't like him. But he felt he was a divine king. And he tried to increase his power. And so politics back in England sort of got in the way of the king coming to a decision about what to do in Virginia. And so he stalled, trying to figure this out. He wanted people to advise him of what to do, but he couldn't find very loyal advisors. They kept switching on him. The fear of the progenitors who came in 1616 was that they would end up becoming what happened to the Irish. When England's first colony, by the way, is Ireland, and when England took over the Irish landlords that were there were stripped of their land, and that land then went to people who were going to be loyal to the English crown. Englishmen, rich Englishmen at that. They came in and took the lands. They controlled the rents. Land is a huge issue in Virginia early on. People looking to make their own way, to bring people over as servants to work the land. The more you bring over, the more land you get. It's kind of like something that feeds off of each other. But now it's no more with the charter revoked in 1624. There's our young king, Charles I. It takes him 4 years after revoking the charter to tap John Harvey to become governor of the colony of Virginia. And he tells John Harvey, your position as governor is only temporary till I figure this out, till I figure out what I want to do with Virginia. The king, according to John Harvey, wanted a full hearing. In other words, he wanted to hear from all constituents on what to do with Virginia. He was not about to make up his mind. Harvey arrives in Virginia in 1630, immediately seized upon by the people already there, the progenitor class. What's going to happen to our land? Can I buy more land? Can I apply for a patent? Can I bring more labor folks over to be my servants so I can get more land? To all of this, Harvey says, I don't have an answer for you. It hasn't been decided yet. So these are what land patents look like. So here's along the James River, one of the peninsulas that jut out. And these are what land patents look like. So if we look at the number 8, Joseph Harwood, he would apply for a patent that would cover that area. Surveyors would go out, and that area is the amount of people that he could bring over to work it. So you can see that he has a certain wealth. Whereas you go over to number 13, Charles Rowan must be exceedingly wealthy because he's bringing over many, many more people. See what I mean? Sort of. In between 1630 and 1635, this is 6 years of time, John Harvey, as governor, approves only 9 land patents. 9! That's it. No more. Things have slowed down in the Virginia colony. And to make matters worse, those that did have land and were growing tobacco aren't getting as much money for their tobacco anymore. Those Dutch. There's a lot of uncertainty in the air. A lot of unhappy people in Virginia. A lot of unhappy progenitor class. First, second, third, fourth generation kids. Or the second, third, fourth sons. They don't know the status of their land because the land was given to them by a company, and now the company no longer exists. So technically the land belongs to the king, but what's the king going to do with the land? And since my liberty, the freedom to do things, is attached to that land, I'm uncertain about that. The progenitors will grumble, and grumble, and will come over time to form factions and approach and demand from John Harvey more than what John Harvey can produce. Suddenly, 2 ships come up over the horizon, the Avon and the Dove. And on board this ship, in 1634, one of those ships is Lord Baltimore, and he shows up with a charter. Yay! No, not yay, because it's not a charter for Virginia, it's a charter for Maryland. And to make matters worse, from the point of view of a progenitor who's been in Virginia for a while, wait a minute, we've been here waiting 10 years now, and we've had no charter for what's going on. We've been waiting 10 years in limbo for something to happen, and what we get is this guy who's Catholic, who's bringing a charter, who's going to carve out land from Virginia. And he's Catholic. Did I mention that already? Problems in Virginia. Problems. The progenitor class is restless. So Charles I not only sent Lord Baltimore over with a charter, he also sent a bunch of paperwork. In that paperwork, to Governor Harvey and to the other progenitor class who was living in Virginia at that time, he has come to a decision about tobacco. It's England that is going to benefit from Virginia tobacco. You Virginians can grow as much tobacco as you want, but you can only sell it in one place, England. And, says Charles I, England will set the price. My merchants in London will set the price, and you have to pay what they say. The progenitor class in 1635 is not happy. They confront Mr. John Harvey and say, we met in the House of Burgess, we've replied to the king, here is this reply, forward it to the king for us, please. Do it. But Harvey has orders. He shows the Virginia progenitor, these are my orders, and I'm going to follow them because that's what the king wants me to do. Not only that, but my orders say I have to help Lord Baltimore carve up parts of Virginia so we can create Maryland. The progenitor class is not happy with the king, Charles I, and they're certainly not happy with his minion, now known as John Harvey, the governor. I remember they have 300 to 500 acres on average, depending on which progenitor you have. They've improved their land that is now in limbo. And to make matters worse is under the Headright System, where they paid for their 50 acres with their passage and the 50 acres of other people coming across, that these former servants are now wanting to be outfitted. They served their time. So tobacco prices are in the gutter. I can only sell it to England, who tells me I can only sell it at this price, which is even below the gutter price. My servants want land and they want to be outfitted. That's going to cost me money. And you still haven't answered the question as to whether I can get more land by bringing more people over under the Headright System. These former second, third, fourth, fifth generation progenitors are very unhappy, and they conduct open rebellion in 1635. They seize John Harvey, they put him on a boat, they send him back to England, and they make John West the chosen guy. And John West, in 1 year, will approve 377 land patents, whereas John Harvey, in 6 years, only approved 9. They got their man. Interestingly, the king doesn't take very kindly to this. He sends John Harvey back to become governor once again, but this time when he sends John Harvey back, he sends him back with several warships and a contingent of Marines. But it's okay. All the participants in the rebellion of 1635, all these progenitors, will be pardoned in 1636. All is forgiven as long as we can keep the peace. So the question is, what was the rebellion about, really? Was it about tobacco? Was it about land and liberty? The uncertainty about who owned the land and the liberty that land guaranteed, that's what this was about. It wasn't about the tobacco. It was the freedom that comes with the land, the freedom to charge rent, the freedom to lease out land, the freedom to influence your governor, your colonial governor. That's what land meant in Virginia. This is one rebellion. Well, let's take a look at Bacon's rebellion. This is a different beast altogether. And this one takes place on the frontier of Virginia in 1676. Nathaniel Bacon was a fairly well-to-do individual, a lot of charisma. But if you look at this painting over here to the left, most of those people are the former servants of the progenitor class, who were given their outfits and 50 acres to work for life on the frontier. A frontier that the Virginia government at the time in Jamestown could not protect, or would not protect, according to Nathaniel Bacon. Protect from what? Indians. And lots of them. And they're not friendly toward whites. Nathaniel Bacon went to Jamestown and asked the House of Burgess and the governor to send an army out to the Virginia frontier to protect these settlers. The governor at the time, George Berkeley, said he could not do it because that would mean having to raise taxes on the richest men in Virginia, and we will not raise taxes to defend the likes of you out on the frontier. Well, not in those words, but that was how these men on the frontier took it. So what Nathaniel Bacon did was he wrote a pamphlet called the Declaration of the People. And in that pamphlet, he charged that the progenitor class in Virginia had failed to do the will of the people, that they had failed to protect them. And because of that, this Declaration of the People declares that that colonial government is now null and void. Nathaniel Bacon is able to arouse interest, anywhere between 500 to 1,000 men, to join a rebel army. The first thing they're going to take care of are, of course, those Indians on the frontier, and they immediately set to that task in the summer of 1676. They go around destroying Indian villages, burning their crops, burning their homes, willingly killing men, women, and children. It didn't matter. Then they set their sights on Jamestown, which, to the painting that you see on the left, is burning. They set it on fire. They completely burned it to the ground. Governor Berkeley escapes, jumps on a ship, heads across to Chesapeake, searching for someone to help him in this rebellion. And he will find a couple of ships and a Marine contingent that will end up heading back. Meanwhile, Bacon, who is initially the victor in this, will die of dysentery. No one really stands up in his place, and just as this confusion, who's our leader without this charismatic guy, the rebellion begins to fall apart. By October, Berkeley is back. He's got his Marines, he's got a couple of ships, and they begin to crack down, and the rebellion is over. What the book does not say, however, is something that comes in another book that was printed in 2001, a very good book by William Cooper called Liberty and Slavery. And it's in the first chapter of that book that William Cooper says a few things about this particular rebellion. And again, it goes back to the idea that land is liberty. These former servants left their native England willingly, signing up to give 5 to 7 years of their lives in servitude for the promise of land. Because with land, then they can make their own way. There is no way any of these people you see in this painting to the left could ever buy land or acquire land in their native England. But they could get a hold of land in Virginia. And if they could hold on to it and work it, then they have liberty to make money. So there they are, your typical Bacon Rebellion soldier. And there's repercussions that emanate out of this. Once Bacon's rebellion is over, the colonial elite, the progenitor, the second, third, fourth, and fifth sons of the wealthy class realize that they cannot trust their own servants. It's best, they're more expensive, but it's best to just buy a slave. Isn't it? Because in 5 years, if we bought the passage of one of these English white servants, if they only get to serve us for 5 or 7 years, then they're free. Free running around with an outfit that we gave them, which includes a gun. That's dangerous. It's best to buy an African who will be enslaved for life. Cooper also writes that once Bacon's rebellion is over, that new laws are put in place that will increase the wealth disparity between the rich and the poor. Because the rich are in charge of the House of Burgess. And they look at what the poor did to Jamestown. No more. The laws that they pass down will favor the wealthy over the poor. They do it through taxation, which becomes pretty schizophrenic. And by that I mean the people who are in Jamestown, who are along those river routes, have no need for infrastructure interior to Virginia. The taxation on the wealthy class will be lowered, and the taxation on the poor people out on the frontier fighting the Indians with barely any amenities, who only want a road or a canal to get their tobacco and crops to market. None of that is in place. So the basic structure, or taxation structure, through the colonial era is set up at this point in time. And it favors the wealthy over the poor. Further, what, again, is this rebellion about? And just like before, it's land, and land equals liberty in this case. But in this case, instead of being a freedom to, it's a freedom from. If you look at the gentleman at the left-hand side, what he's looking for is freedom from arbitrary rules, freedom from arbitrary land allocation, freedom from arbitrary taxes, and freedom from the tyranny imposed by the aristocrats back in Jamestown. That's his definition of liberty. Berkeley, by the way, once he came back, he rounded up a whole bunch of people and he executed 23 of them. He seized property from dozens of people, and because of this, the rising fear of class warfare, Berkeley was mercifully recalled. The rich class, the progenitor class of Virginia, breathed a sigh of relief once Berkeley left. Land equals liberty, which means money. And this could never happen in England. That's what the poor folks were looking for. It's what the progenitor class was looking at. Everybody is looking to get wealthy in this system. That ends part 2. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions ever, you feel free to email. Okay? Thank you very much.